Prince Harry collapsed to his knees in Montecito, not from grief, not from loss, but from something far more unthinkable. 2 white envelopes sat trembling in his hand. Not royal dispatches, not Hollywood contracts, but DNA results. Cold, scientific, final, and in a single glance, they shattered the foundation of everything he thought he knew about his children, his wife, and himself. This wasn't just a royal scandal. This was an identity crisis detonated in real time. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. What would you do if the world you built with someone you loved, someone you trusted, was exposed as a lie? If you discovered, with undeniable certainty, that the 2 little souls you've poured your heart into were not yours? The world has watched Prince Harry fall before. We saw him walk behind his mother's coffin. We saw him stare blankly through palace windows, trapped in the cold machinery of monarchy. We saw him rebel, run, crash, rebuild. But nothing, not even the death of Princess Diana, not even the Megxit media firestorm, could compare to what allegedly happened just days ago in a quiet, gated estate in Montecito. And here's the question the palace never wanted asked. What if Prince Harry was never the biological father of Archie and Lilibet? Now, before we go any further, let's be clear. We are standing on the edge of a narrative that's been buried, protected, twisted, and silenced. But the whispers have grown too loud. The security footage, the anonymous calls, the sealed court requests, they've all converged into one explosive moment. The moment Prince Harry opened the envelope. It didn't come from a tabloid. It wasn't leaked on Twitter. It came via private courier, addressed only to him, and hand-delivered under tight security. No press, no legal intermediaries. Just 2 sheets of paper and a truth so brutal it nearly broke him. But why now? Why did this moment matter more than any other in Harry's turbulent post-royal life? Because for the past 5 years, the House of Windsor has been playing a game of chess. A public spectacle with high-stakes propaganda, Netflix drama, Archwell charity launches, and perfectly lit photo ops. But beneath the surface, palace insiders, PR handlers, and investigative journalists have been chasing one question they were never supposed to ask. Were Archie and Lilibet ever truly royal? And if not, who orchestrated it? Let's rewind. Remember Meghan's infamous sit-down with Oprah in 2021? The tearful revelations, the allegations of racism, the bold claims that the firm tried to control the narrative about Archie's skin tone? At the time, most dismissed it as sensationalism. But now, some believe it was preemptive damage control, a decoy, a distraction from the fact that questions of legitimacy were already circling inside palace walls, whispered by aides, tracked by security, and noted quietly in off-the-record memos. Because here's the twist. This wasn't the first time the DNA question was raised. In fact, it was allegedly Prince William himself, yes, Harry's own brother, who first suggested an internal lineage verification protocol after Lilibet's birth. Royal protocol demands it for heirs, but in this case, the tests were deferred. Why? Because Meghan refused, citing privacy violations. And yet, Meghan's own Netflix contract reportedly had a clause requiring lineage verification for any royal-based storylines involving the children. A clause she tried to renegotiate and failed. So who finally pushed the test through? There are 2 versions of this story, and both are chilling. One version says Harry ordered the test himself, secretly, after an anonymous informant sent him photos and emails dated back to the final weeks of Meghan's pregnancy. Photos of her in places she claimed never to have been, with someone she swore she hadn't seen in years. The email subject line, "You deserve the truth." The other version says the palace did it, quietly, surgically. That they used archived samples from royal vaults, matched against publicly obtained data, and then leaked the results to Harry in a final, silent strike. Either way, the outcome was the same. And here's where things get even darker. Because what those test results revealed was not just a mismatch. It was a double mismatch. 2 children. 2 biological anomalies. Not one, but both of Harry's children, reportedly, did not share his DNA. Let that sink in. And yet, this isn't just about science. This is about betrayal, about public image, about a man who gave up a kingdom for love, only to discover the love may have been built on deception. But what did Harry do after reading those results? He didn't call the palace. He didn't confront Meghan, not immediately. He went dark. For 72 hours, no one saw him. His staff was told to stand down. Security logs show no exit or entry. According to sources close to Montecito insiders, he stayed in the private library. Blinds closed, phone off, staring at those 2 pages for hours. Imagine the spiral, the flashbacks, the memories of Diana, the interviews, the speeches about fatherhood, the global tours with Meghan where he beamed beside her and the children. All of it, now suspect. And yet, there was no press conference, no statement, no damage control. Why? Because in that silence, something was brewing. Something that may finally explain the tense silence from Meghan's side. The sudden withdrawal from her cooking show project. The indefinite hold placed on their upcoming Netflix docuseries. The last-minute cancellation of a scheduled appearance at a Hollywood Christmas gala. All of it aligns with one hidden pivot point, the DNA envelope. But perhaps the most gut-wrenching question of all is the one that haunts Harry now. If I'm not their father, who is? The rumors are already spiraling. A man in London claiming to be Archie's real father. A doctor's visit in Toronto before Meghan's move to the UK. A private fertility consultation in LA just weeks before the conception of Lillibet. The puzzle pieces are out there. Some of them are already in our hands. Others, locked away in private bank vaults, encrypted servers, and NDA-covered testimonies. This isn't just a scandal. It's a reckoning. Because for a man who once declared that he had finally found his freedom, the very foundation of that freedom may now be crumbling. And still, Meghan remains silent. No Instagram posts, no public denials, no angry lawyers flooding the press with cease and desist orders. Just silence, which raises one more critical question. Did she know this was coming all along? You see, when you trace back Meghan's public trajectory over the last year, the carefully crafted PR statements, the calculated shifts in branding, the pivot from royal identity to global lifestyle influencer, it begins to look a lot like someone preparing for a contingency. A world where the royal titles no longer apply. A world where Archie and Lilibet may not inherit anything from the crown. A world where Harry is no longer useful. And that, right there, may be the most terrifying betrayal of all. Because if Harry's collapse wasn't from shock, but from realization that everything he gave up, everything he sacrificed, was for a life that may have been orchestrated from the start, then we're not looking at a scandal. We're looking at a trap. And what comes next might be the royal family's most brutal chess move yet. But what if Harry wasn't the only one who had known for weeks? What if someone inside the palace had been preparing for this exact moment all along? What if the real explosion is still coming? What if Harry wasn't the only one who had known for weeks? What if someone inside the palace had been preparing for this exact moment all along? What if the real explosion is still coming? Now imagine this. A single whisper, dropped into the wrong ear at the wrong time, has the power to unravel an empire. That's exactly how this began. Long before the DNA results ever touched Harry's trembling fingers in Montecito, before the sealed envelopes arrived at the gates, before the rumors hit the headlines, a silent storm had already started to brew. Not in California, not even in London, but inside the walls of the firm itself. Within the inner sanctum of palace staff who are trained to say nothing and yet know everything. Because contrary to what Meghan and Harry's carefully curated PR narrative would have you believe, the British royal family is not just a lineage. It's an intelligence operation, a legacy machine. Every move is watched, every word logged. And when something doesn't add up, whispers turn into investigations. So let's go back to the origin point, the moment the first question was asked. It wasn't William. Not at first. It wasn't Charles. Not Camilla. Not Anne. It was a woman most people have never heard of, a veteran palace aide known only by her first name, Margaret. Margaret had been with the firm for over 30 years. She'd seen 3 royal divorces, for political scandals, and more rebranding efforts than a Fortune 500 PR firm. Her loyalty was absolute. Her silence, legendary. But there was one thing Margaret prided herself on above all else: protecting the royal line. And it was Margaret who first noticed the discrepancy, not in a scandalous photo, not in some hushed conversation, but in a birth certificate. That's right, Meghan and Harry's original announcement of Archie's birth included a certificate that, at first glance, appeared perfectly ordinary. But when Margaret, in her routine checks of royal archival documents, cross-referenced the formatting with other birth records of royal children, something didn't sit right. The timestamp, the medical sign-off, the attending physician's name, it didn't match any official palace-approved delivery logs. A red flag. She didn't raise it immediately. No, Margaret was smarter than that. She simply watched, waited, quietly began gathering data. And as months passed, more oddities began to stack up. Meghan's mysterious trip to Toronto 3 months before Archie's birth. The fact that the Queen was reportedly only shown a photo of Archie at first. Not introduced to him in person until much later, under controlled conditions. Doesn't that strike you as strange? Now let's fast forward. By the time Lillibet was born, the whispers had already reached higher ears. Margaret had passed her concerns up the chain. A second aide, a former communications officer turned private investigator for royal security, was brought in to discreetly verify some of the findings. That's when the whisper campaign, as it would later be referred to internally, truly began. Nothing on paper. No email trails. Just veiled conversations over scotch. Coded phrases and handwritten notes. Palace insiders began watching Meghan and Harry's movements more closely, cataloging interactions, recording inconsistencies. They weren't looking for gossip. They were looking for proof. And then came the leak. An anonymous call. No caller ID. Just a British accent in a single sentence. Your prince has been played. Check Toronto. Spring 2018. That's it. But to someone like Margaret, that was everything. Spring 2018. Toronto. Meghan was supposedly already engaged to Harry. But palace travel logs show she made an unaccounted-for 3-day stopover before a scheduled royal event. Officially, it was attributed to personal preparation. But there was no detail, no receipts. And now, someone was saying, that stopover wasn't solo. Now imagine you're the palace. Your future monarch's bloodline might be at risk. What do? You investigate, but in silence. That's when Prince William enters the picture. He didn't know about the whisper campaign at first. In fact, he was one of the last to be informed. Why? Because no one wanted to tell him until they had concrete evidence. He's the heir, after all. Exposing him to a speculative scandal without proof would be catastrophic. But eventually, the pattern was undeniable. And William, ever the strategist, ever the protector of the crown, made a decision. He ordered an intelligence cross-match. That's not a tabloid phrase. That's MI6 language. Meaning, private intelligence operatives, previously connected to government counterintelligence, were asked to run a quiet background correlation between publicly available metadata from Meghan's travel, medical facilities in North America, and any known associates from her pre-royal life. You want to know what they found? A man, late 30s, Toronto-based, fitness trainer, known to frequent the same wellness clinics Meghan once used. No direct photo of them together, but multiple digital footprints, overlapping locations, mutual acquaintances, Instagram tags from similar venues posted minutes apart. Coincidence? Maybe. But when those breadcrumbs were passed back to Margaret, she compared the man's recent online photos with childhood images of Archie. And according to multiple sources, she gasped. That gasp marked the real beginning of the storm. Because shortly after, things inside the palace began to shift. Meetings got quieter. Phones were confiscated at strategy briefings. Certain documents were moved from the general archives to a private vault. And most notably, Princess Anne was brought in. Why her? Because Anne doesn't play politics. She plays chess. While Charles was reportedly paralyzed with fear over what this could mean for the monarchy's image, and William was cautiously navigating both family and duty, and began mapping out what to do if the worst was true. In her words, if the bloodline's been faked, we clean it surgically. No leaks. No theatrics. Let that sink in. All this time, while the public was debating Oprah interviews and Spotify contracts, the monarchy was already preparing for a biological betrayal. And yet, through it all, Meghan and Harry seemed unbothered. Unaware. Or were they? Because here's where things get eerily coincidental. Just as the palace began quietly pulling documents, Meghan's legal team began issuing blanket cease and desist orders to multiple UK media outlets, even those that hadn't published anything yet. A preemptive strike. Then Harry's team requested to restrict access to the royal vault for legacy preservation. Another red flag. And then, the most suspicious move of all, Harry and Meghan withdrew from a scheduled appearance at a child wellness summit in Geneva, citing unexpected family commitments. Sources say they were seen entering a private medical facility the same week. Was that when the tests were taken? And if so, why? Had Harry begun to suspect? Or had Meghan forced the issue to preemptively control the narrative before someone else did? Because by now, the whisper campaign was no longer whispers. It had reached the press. Not the front pages. Not yet. But emails began circulating in elite media circles. Unconfirmed claims. Anonymous sources. Something about paternity. Editors were holding back, waiting for someone to publish first. But there was one journalist who didn't wait. He had a contact inside the Montecito estate. A former staffer. Someone who had seen Harry, pale and shaking, alone in his study. Someone who had glimpsed the envelope. They sent one text. It's real. And he knows. Which leads us right to the edge of the cliff we left dangling in the intro. Because while Harry was still locked in silence, trying to decide what to do with the truth, someone else was already preparing to weaponize it. And that's where the next chapter picks up. Because the envelope? That wasn't the real betrayal. The real betrayal was already living under his roof. Why would a woman who had just joined the most scrutinized family in the world secretly visit a private fertility clinic under an alias weeks before announcing her first pregnancy? And more importantly, what was she hiding? In the polished fairy tale version of Harry and Meghan's love story, everything seems impeccably timed. A whirlwind romance, a royal wedding, and, just a few months later, the magical announcement: Meghan Markle was pregnant with their first child. The palace released a glowing statement. Fans swooned. The media had its headlines. But behind the curated smiles and perfect lighting, something didn't line up. Because before that joyous announcement, there was a quiet, very deliberate detour, one that, until now, had been erased from public timelines. A secret trip to a discreet, high-end fertility clinic in Los Angeles. She didn't go as the Duchess of Sussex. She didn't go with Harry. She went under an assumed name. With her phone turned off, her driver instructed not to wait, and her visit logged manually rather than electronically. This wasn't just about privacy. This was about control. Let's walk through it. According to leaked appointment logs from the Beverly Crest Women's Wellness Institute, a clinic famous for treating celebrities and offering high-end assisted reproduction services, a woman matching Meghan's description checked in for a consultation in the spring of 2018. The alias used? M. Richter. Richter. A name with no known connection to Meghan. No family ties. No film roles. No past aliases. Why that name? Some believe it was randomly chosen. Others say it's the surname of a former associate, someone she allegedly knew back in her Suits days, a connection long buried. But the name is less important than what she did inside that clinic. Sources with access to the intake files described the appointment as a fertility preservation consult, involving hormone level testing, egg viability scans, and a discussion about embryo implantation timelines. Wait, implantation? You heard that right. The implication was not just preservation. It was active planning. But here's the catch. Meghan was already publicly involved with Prince Harry by that time. The palace timeline suggested their relationship was strong, natural, and progressing toward engagement. So why wasn't this appointment logged under her real name? Why didn't she bring Harry with her? Why the secrecy? Some insiders believe it's simple. Meghan wanted to ensure her future, with or without Harry. That appointment, they say, wasn't just about preparing for children. It was about insurance. A backup plan. If the royal fantasy didn't go as planned, she'd still have a path to motherhood, to legacy, to leverage. But another theory, one much darker, has begun circulating inside the palace. What if this wasn't about future children at all? What if Meghan had already made plans, quietly, independently, to begin the process of motherhood outside of Harry's involvement? In other words, what if the child Harry would one day believe was his was already in the works before he was ever truly part of the decision? Let's not jump ahead. Let's stick to the timeline. Weeks after the alleged clinic visit, Meghan and Harry were photographed together at the Invictus Games in Toronto. Body language analysts called it electric, genuine, magnetic. And yet, Behind the scenes, Meghan reportedly took multiple solo trips back to Los Angeles that same season. Short visits. Low-key. No press. When pressed about these trips in later interviews, her reps simply said she was visiting friends. But according to flight manifests and hotel logs obtained through investigative reports, she stayed not with friends, but at an Airbnb less than 2 miles from the same fertility clinic. So again we ask, why the secrecy? Was Meghan engaging in fertility planning on her own terms? Was she freezing embryos? Working with a donor? Testing viability options separate from Harry? And if so, was he ever informed? That's the real question, isn't it? Consent. Knowledge. Trust. Did Harry know about these visits before the pregnancies? Or was he told a story, one he had no reason to doubt until years later? Fast forward. In early 2019, the world was told Meghan was pregnant. The bump emerged. The media fawned. And yet, the pregnancy was oddly protected. No hospital records were released. No clear due date was confirmed. Meghan famously refused to participate in the traditional post-birth photo outside the hospital, the one Kate and Diana had both done before her. Instead, a vague announcement appeared in the media. Meghan had gone into labor and then, hours later, had already given birth. Even royal correspondents were confused. They didn't get the call in real time. There was no hospital press pool, just a delayed statement. Now, at the time, most of the public assumed it was just another act of Meghan and Harry protecting their privacy. But now, in hindsight, many believe it was a cover, a calculated effort to keep details hidden. Because when you control the timeline, you control the narrative. And if something was off about that birth, if the conception didn't happen the way the palace was told, there would be no way to verify it. No photos, no footage, no witnesses. All roads trace back to the clinic. Now, remember the man we mentioned earlier, the one from Toronto, the one whose name was flagged during William's private intelligence inquiry. Guess what? He also reportedly visited the Beverly Crest Women's Wellness Institute. In the same quarter Meghan's name appeared in the logs. 2 overlapping visits. 2 months before Meghan and Harry's magical pregnancy announcement. Is that a coincidence? And if not, who is this man? He's remained anonymous so far, although some reporters believe they have identified him. There are whispers of non-disclosure agreements, a sealed payout, a potential gag order. But here's what we do know. He shares facial features with Archie that royal watchers and insiders have quietly commented on for years. He once worked at a wellness retreat in Canada that Meghan was known to visit during her Suits days. He recently contacted a London tabloid, offering documents and biological evidence that he claims will rewrite the royal line. That article hasn't been published yet, but the threat hangs in the air, and the palace knows it. Back in Montecito, Harry remained in the dark. Or at least, he acted like he did. But some say the cracks were beginning to show. Friends close to him claim that in the months after Lillibet's birth, Harry grew withdrawn, moody, increasingly paranoid. He began asking questions about medical histories, family resemblances. He started requesting reprints of childhood photos. A subtle hunt for clues, for proof, or for contradiction. And Meghan? She shut it down. Every time the conversation veered into genetics or timelines, she changed the subject, claimed he was being paranoid, that he was buying into palace gossip, that he needed therapy. But here's the kicker. According to insiders, Meghan also began discreetly consulting legal experts in California around this time, not divorce attorneys, but family law specialists, ones who specialize in paternity rights, custody frameworks, and the enforcement of international privacy laws. Why consult such lawyers unless you're preparing for something? Unless you already know what might be coming. Which brings us back to that clinic, that locked file, that single visit. Scrubbed from the public record, but not from the shadows. What if that visit wasn't just a medical consultation? What if it was the moment the entire royal scandal truly began? Because if Meghan arranged for assistance, a donor, an embryo transfer, or even a surrogacy influence process, without informing Harry, then this wasn't a case of miscommunication. It was premeditation, a decision made alone, hidden, sealed, until now. But what if the palace knew all of this for years? What if they had the file, the logs, the receipts? What if they were simply waiting for the right time to strike? Because as we'll see in the next chapter, That time came the moment Prince William launched Project Redwood. And what that file contained was more than just proof. It was the trigger. What would it take for the future King of England to break every royal protocol, engage off-the-books intelligence operatives, and secretly commission a DNA investigation into his own nephew and niece? Apparently, just one email, one anonymous file drop, labeled with 2 words that sent chills down Prince William's spine. Project Redwood. Let's rewind and unpack how one of the most explosive royal scandals in modern history didn't begin in a boardroom or on a tabloid cover, but in a dusty back corridor of Kensington Palace. It started subtly. William had always carried a quiet skepticism toward Meghan. Not hatred, not even jealousy, just wariness, a gut instinct, a military officer's radar. From the very beginning, from the first time Meghan stepped foot into royal territory, William noticed things Harry didn't. The inconsistencies, the deflections, the way she would charm a room and then, just minutes later, leave age shaken behind closed doors. But William kept his reservations to himself, at least publicly. He played the part, smiled at the wedding, made speeches, shook hands. Privately, though, the whispers had begun to gnaw at him, especially after Archie was born. Something about the timeline, about the secrecy, had never quite sat right. But William, like the rest of the family, understood the value of peace. After all, the monarchy was already weathering the storms of Brexit, declining public trust, and Charles's increasingly wobbly public image. So when Harry and Meghan packed their bags, renounced royal duties, and fled to North America, William, according to multiple sources, felt relief. That is, until the day the flash drive arrived. No note, no signature, just a nondescript brown envelope delivered via private courier to Kensington Palace, marked urgent, confidential. William's private secretary nearly threw it out, believing it to be just another deranged fan threat. But something made him pause. He opened it. Inside was a flash drive, and on it, a single document, password protected. But the password was the real clue. Diana 19. It was too specific, too personal. Only someone close to William, or someone who had access to sensitive family knowledge, would ever use a reference that haunting. William ordered his security analyst to scan the drive for malware, then instructed his most trusted tech aide to decrypt it. What opened wasn't just a document. It was a bombshell dossier, compiled over months, maybe even years, featuring time-stamped photos, cross-checked medical logs, flight data, even facial recognition analyses comparing young Archie to known associates of Meghan's from her Toronto and Los Angeles days. It also included the logs from the Beverly Crest Women's Wellness Institute, the same clinic Meghan had visited under the alias M. Richter, the same facility flagged by internal palace whispers months earlier. But it didn't stop there. The dossier was deeply organized, laid out like a military operation. Separate tabs detailed. Subject 1. Archie. Timelines, images, known inconsistencies. Subject 2. Lillibet. Birth irregularities, hospital data anomalies. Subject 3. Markle. Travel history, donor possibilities, potential legal vulnerabilities. Known associates, including a man in Toronto referred to only as X. But the most disturbing part? A line in bold red text at the top of the file's summary page. Royal paternity misrepresentation detected, recommending lineage verification. Who had written this? And more importantly, why deliver it to William? That's where things take an even darker turn. Because according to multiple intelligence insiders, the document didn't originate in the UK. It was compiled overseas, in Canada, likely by a private group of former intelligence contractors who now operate as a shadow consultancy, occasionally assisting celebrities, politicians, and even royal figures when traditional means aren't discreet enough. And they didn't do it out of journalistic curiosity. They did it because someone had paid them. But who? No name was attached. No invoice. No bank trail that could be traced. Just the password, Diana 19, and the title, Project Redwood. A code name? An inside joke? Or something more? Here's one theory that's gained traction behind palace doors. Redwood trees are known for 2 things: their towering presence and their shallow roots. Despite being some of the tallest trees on Earth, redwoods have surprisingly delicate foundations. Just like Meghan and Harry's carefully crafted empire. Publicly massive, privately unstable. William didn't act immediately. For nearly 2 weeks, he sat on the file, reviewed it, cross-referenced the data, consulted in whispers with trusted aides. Not even Kate knew the full extent of what he was seeing. He had 2 options. Bury it, destroy the file, deny everything, and pray it never saw daylight. Or investigate. He chose the latter. But not through palace channels. Not through Scotland Yard or GCHQ. No, William reached out to a different contact. A former MI6 handler, now working freelance under diplomatic immunity. And what William instructed him to do was clear. I want confirmation. Quiet. Fast. Irrefutable. Thus began the second phase of Project Redwood. It's important to understand what this meant. For the future king to engage in a private paternity investigation, not out of scandal-seeking malice, but from a desire to protect the integrity of the crown, was an extraordinary risk. But William had always seen himself as the protector of the realm. And if the very line of succession was being manipulated through deception, wasn't it his duty to expose it? The handler worked fast. Over the course of 3 weeks, discrete data was pulled from archived royal medical samples, ones kept in deep storage for potential future medical emergencies. Hair samples, blood smears, tissue tests, Harry's DNA, taken from a years-old blood draw during his army service, was quietly retrieved and analyzed. Then, using public images of Archie and Lilibet, combined with facial symmetry software and medical databases, the team constructed probabilistic models. What they found, according to sources familiar with the report, the probability of biological parentage between Harry and Archie was estimated below 10%. For Lillibet, less than 1%. In other words, statistically, biologically, genetically, it didn't match. But William didn't release the report. Not yet. Instead, he locked it in a private safe and waited. Why? Because he knew Meghan's PR instincts would detect the shift. He needed to see how she moved, what she said, whether she got wind of the investigation and tried to counter. And sure enough, just days after the handler concluded his report, Meghan canceled 2 appearances. One in New York, one in Vancouver. Then came the Netflix clause. That's right. Her legal team suddenly pushed to amend the terms of their Netflix content license, requesting removal of all references to royal lineage for Archie and Lilibet. Coincidence? Not likely. William interpreted it as confirmation. She knew. And that's when he made the boldest decision yet. He didn't leak the findings to the press. He leaked them to Harry. But not directly. He sent an intermediary, someone Harry still trusted. A former army buddy. The kind of man who doesn't speak unless it matters. He handed Harry the envelope, said nothing, and left. The password? Diana 19. Because William knew the truth would mean more coming from her memory than from his voice. And when Harry opened that file, alone, in his Montecito study, the collapse began. A collapse not just of a man, but of a myth. But what William didn't know was that Meghan had already activated her counterattack. Because just as the dossier reached Harry's hands, Meghan received a tip that someone at the palace was preparing to leak a second file, a file even more dangerous than the first. And that's where we go next. Because if you thought the DNA report was shocking, wait until you see what's buried in the Netflix clause. What if the unraveling of Meghan and Harry's story didn't begin with a betrayal or a secret, but with a contract? Specifically, a single clause buried in the fine print of their $100 million Netflix deal, a clause that would silently ignite a wildfire of panic, cover-ups, and irreversible consequences. Because sometimes, all it takes is one line in a contract to detonate an empire. Let's break this down. When Harry and Meghan signed their landmark agreement with Netflix in 2020, it was heralded as a new era for the Sussexes. They were stepping out of the shadows of the monarchy and into the spotlight of global storytelling. Documentaries, animations, children's programming, all branded with their unique, authentic voice. But behind the carefully choreographed announcement, behind the press releases, smiling Zoom calls, and PR spin, lurked a truth far more complicated. Netflix had concerns. Not about ratings, not about production, about credibility. According to leaked internal memos, Netflix executives were increasingly aware that the Sussexes' value as content creators depended almost entirely on one thing: their royal authenticity. The closer they were to the heart of the monarchy, the more audiences tuned in. But the further they drifted, in geography, relevance, or lineage, the riskier the brand became. So in a rarely discussed legal maneuver, Netflix inserted a clause into the agreement, an indemnification clause. It required that any content featuring members of the royal family, especially children who might inherit titles, must be truth verified. The wording was clinical, corporate. All representations pertaining to royal lineage, succession rights, biological parentage, or inheritance shall be subject to verification protocols, the results of which shall be submitted confidentially for legal review. In short, if Meghan and Harry were going to include Archie and Lilibet in anything, photos, stories, interviews, documentaries, Netflix wanted proof that the children were biologically his. It wasn't personal. It was legal. Protect the company kind of stuff. And that's what made it so devastating. Because from that point on, Meghan's entire narrative became vulnerable. Now here's where things start to get interesting. In early drafts of their first docuseries, the one that would eventually become Harry and Meghan, production notes reportedly included planned segments about Harry's bond with Archie, scenes of family life, anecdotes about fatherhood. But just before final approval, Meghan's team suddenly pulled several of those segments, claimed they were too personal, that the children's privacy came first. Netflix didn't push back, at least not publicly. But behind the scenes, attorneys began pressing for the required documentation. Private emails were exchanged. Routine verification, they called it. But Meghan knew what it meant. That clause, that tiny sentence in the contract, now had teeth. So what did she do? She stalled. She delayed submission of medical records, claimed she needed time, blamed it on data protection policies, then hinted at filing exemptions based on Archie and Lilibet's dual national privacy rights. But Netflix didn't budge. Executives were worried. Between palace tension, declining public favor, and Harry's erratic media behavior, the company had started to feel the heat. Viewership wasn't the only concern, it was reputation. Investors wanted confidence. Legal departments wanted assurance. And somewhere in all that pressure, the clause triggered a deadline. That's when everything shifted. Because according to an internal memo leaked from an anonymous source at Netflix's legal division, Meghan was quietly warned. Failure to comply with lineage verification may result in removal of minor subjects from all official programming and promotional material. Translation: if you don't prove Harry is the biological father, we cut the kids. That wasn't just a financial blow. That was a legacy threat. Meghan had built her post-palace empire around the idea of redefining royalty, a modern monarchy. Her children were the bridge between Hollywood and Windsor, the living proof that you could have both. Without that connection, the empire cracked. So she made a move. A secret one. According to a source familiar with the situation, Meghan contacted a private California-based genetic testing facility, not through official royal channels, not with Harry's approval, but through an intermediary. She requested a discreet confirmation test, citing legal contract obligations. The facility was told that the sample belonged to a public figure's children, and that the father's sample would be submitted separately. Except, here's the twist, Harry never submitted his sample. He didn't even know the test was happening. Meghan allegedly used a previously archived blood draw from one of Harry's past physicals, obtained without his direct consent. The legality of this move is still hotly debated, but the intent was clear. Meghan wasn't trying to confirm Harry's paternity. She was trying to control the results before anyone else got there first. But something went wrong. According to insiders, the facility flagged the submission due to irregular sample handling, chain of custody issues, authentication questions. In short, the test couldn't proceed under their lab's integrity policies. They rejected the samples, and Meghan panicked. She knew the Netflix deadline was approaching. She knew the palace, especially William, was circling. She knew Harry had grown distant, withdrawn, paranoid. And then came the worst moment of all. Netflix called Harry directly, not Meghan. Harry. They asked him to verify, personally, that the children were his biological offspring, in compliance with the contractual agreement. Harry reportedly had no idea what they were talking about. He thought the clause had been handled. Assumed Meghan's team had managed it months earlier. But now he was being asked to prove something he'd never questioned before. And suddenly, he began questioning everything. He asked Meghan, She deflected, said it was insulting, that Netflix was overreaching, that it was none of their business. But Harry, for the first time, didn't back down. He wanted answers. What followed was a 3-day silence between them. No communication. No contact. Harry, according to sources, went into full spiral. He called his security team, requested files, tried to verify dates, pulled private family photos, started comparing timelines. He reached out to a former friend, one who had been cut off after Megxit, and asked a single question. Was I ever gone when I shouldn't have been? That's when the realization started to set in. Because the more he looked, the more it unraveled. And Meghan, realizing the walls were closing in, made one final attempt to neutralize the threat. She offered Netflix a compromise. Remove the children from future footage. Recut promotional material. Focus only on Meghan and Harry. Netflix agreed, publicly. But privately, they leaked the conflict to the press. That's when the headlines began. Netflix dispute behind Sussex rebranding. Archie and Lilibet pulled from series. Lineage clause causes internal rift. It wasn't just a PR disaster. It was a bloodletting. Hollywood insiders started whispering that Meghan's image wasn't what it seemed. Executives began distancing themselves. Projects were quietly shelved. Investors backed out. And for Harry, the phone calls stopped. He wasn't being booked for conferences anymore. Corporate speaking events pulled out. The Archwell Foundation saw donor hesitations. And then came the letter, a formal legal request. Not from Netflix, but from a media ethics watchdog, demanding clarification on royal paternity claims made in past press statements. That was the final straw. Harry needed answers. And that's when he made the call, to the same lab Meghan had contacted weeks earlier. But this time, he went himself. Alone. He submitted his sample, without telling Meghan. And when the results came back, everything changed. But before he had the chance to confront her, before he could even process what he'd just discovered, Meghan vanished. No phone, no staff, no warning. Gone. And that's where the story picks up next. Because her disappearance wasn't just an escape. It was a strategy. And what she left behind in Montecito would break him. What would you do if a stranger appeared with a briefcase of documents and claimed he was your son's real father? What if he had the dates, the messages, the photos? The kind of evidence that turns suspicion into certainty? That's exactly what landed on the desk of a London tabloid editor one rainy Thursday afternoon. A man, calm, measured, confident, walked in without an appointment and said 10 words that made the entire newsroom freeze. I'm the biological father of Meghan Markle's first child. At first, they laughed. Crackpots show up all the time. Conspiracy theorists, obsessives, wannabe royals with delusions of grandeur. But this guy was different. He didn't scream. He didn't beg for attention. He simply placed a locked briefcase on the table and slid over a small, embossed business card. No name, just an email address and a single word. Custody. The man identified himself, off the record, as a Canadian national. Early 40s. Former wellness and performance coach. Lived in Toronto until recently. And, most importantly, he claimed to have had a short but intense personal relationship with Meghan Markle in late 2017 through mid-2018, during a window where Meghan was officially with Harry, but allegedly traveled alone more often than previously known. His name has not been publicly confirmed, but what he carried with him, that changed everything. Inside the briefcase were meticulously arranged files, screenshots of direct messages exchanged between him and Meghan. Flirtatious, intimate, time-stamped. Email threads from private, encrypted services. Boarding passes matching Meghan's secret solo trips from LA to Toronto. A series of candid photographs showing them together at a private yoga retreat in Muskoka, just north of Toronto. No paparazzi. No glam. Just two people who looked very, very familiar. But the final item was a sealed envelope containing a DNA profile comparison between himself and Archie. He wouldn't say how he got Archie's DNA, only that it had been provided by a former household staff member with a conscience. Let that sit for a moment. A former household staffer, someone inside Montecito, or Frogmore Cottage. Either way, this wasn't speculative anymore. This was forensic. And according to the independent lab summary, included in the envelope, the man shared a 99.97% match with Archie's autosomal DNA. Statistically, that level of accuracy suggests direct paternity. So who is this man? And why now? That's what editors across London, New York, and LA began asking. Rumors spread fast. Meghan's legal team scrambled. Several tabloid outlets received thinly veiled legal warnings reminding them that defamation laws applied to unsourced biological speculation. But then, something strange happened. The man disappeared. Just as quickly as he'd appeared, he vanished from public view. No follow-up interviews. No statements. No social media presence. Nothing. Some say he was paid off. Others claim Meghan's lawyers served him with a super injunction, a rare UK legal mechanism that doesn't just ban the story from being published, but bans anyone from reporting that a ban even exists. But despite the legal silence, the fire had already been lit. Because at that very moment, Harry was conducting his own paternity test, and the results matched, not just with the anonymous dossier William had received, but with the man's submission. According to sources close to Harry, he didn't believe it at first. He thought it was a smear campaign, an elaborate hoax. But when he looked at the dates, the timing, the patterns, it all began to align. The solo Toronto trips, the coldness between him and Meghan during her pregnancy, the sudden insistence on privacy regarding Archie's birth, the odd medical records that were never fully released, and most haunting of all, the eyes. Archie's eyes. A different shape, a different hue, a different gaze. Harry had always dismissed it as a quirk of genetics. But now, he couldn't unsee it. Still, part of him resisted. He didn't want to believe Meghan was capable of something so devastating, so premeditated, so manipulative. So he confronted her. But Meghan, according to one insider who overheard part of the confrontation, didn't deny it outright. She allegedly said, "You knew who I was when you met me. You just didn't want to admit it." Cryptic, evasive, infuriating. What did she mean by that? Was it a confession? Or just a psychological deflection? Whatever it was, it broke Harry. He reportedly left the Montecito compound that night and checked into a hotel in Santa Barbara under a false name. His security team was told to stand down. For the first time since leaving the UK, Harry was completely alone. And Meghan? She didn't follow. Instead, she placed several urgent calls to her crisis PR firm. By morning, a strategy was in place. She would spin the narrative as emotional blackmail by palace operatives, accuse Harry of being manipulated, suggest the DNA tests were falsified, reposition herself as the victim, again, of royal bullying. But before any of it could go live, the man reappeared. Only this time, he wasn't speaking to tabloids. He was seen entering the building of a Los Angeles family law firm, one that specializes in high-profile custody cases involving complex international citizenship disputes. And he wasn't alone. He was carrying a new envelope, marked, Custody Application, Subject, Archie Harrison, Mountbatten, Windsor. That's right. He wasn't just claiming paternity anymore. He was preparing to fight for parental rights. Now imagine the legal firestorm this could unleash. If proven true, it would mean Archie was not the biological child of Prince Harry. Meghan potentially misled the public, the palace, and Harry himself. The entire royal lineage narrative around Archie would collapse. Title inheritance rights could be retroactively challenged. The validity of multiple statements made in interviews and documentaries would come under fire. Meghan could face lawsuits, not just from Harry, but from the monarchy and media institutions defrauded by her representations. And most ironically, it would mean the man whom Meghan allegedly used to escape the confines of the monarchy was never part of it at all. But here's where things twist even deeper. According to leaks from within the legal firm, this man isn't just pursuing custody. He's not asking for full parental control. He's not trying to take Archie away. He just wants it on record, legally, globally, permanently, that he is Archie's father. In other words, he's after truth, legacy, recognition. That's it. No tabloid interviews. No book deals. No tell-all memoir. Just his name. On the record. Beside Archie's. So what does this mean for Harry? It means the very thing he gave up everything to protect. The family he fled to preserve. May never have been his to begin with. And what about Meghan? She now faces a war on 3 fronts. A biological challenge from the man she thought was buried in her past. A devastated husband with proof in hand. And a palace ready to pounce. But she's not out yet. Because if history has taught us anything, it's this. Meghan always has a plan, and her next move will blindside everyone. Because while the world was still reeling from the paternity revelation, she was already preparing to flip the narrative again by turning the spotlight on Lillibet. How do you prove the truth when the world no longer trusts the storytellers? When Meghan's team tried to spin Archie's paternity scandal as nothing more than royal disinformation, the palace made a move no one saw coming, not even Harry. It didn't involve the press. It didn't involve the courts. It involved a vault, a silent, impenetrable chamber buried beneath Windsor Castle, known only to a select group of senior royals and their most trusted advisors. A room untouched by cameras, immune to leaks, and protected by protocols forged in wartime. Its name inside the palace? The Crown Archive. But for those who truly understood its purpose, it had a more chilling title: the Bloodline Vault. And inside it, a chilling collection of vials, slides, tissue samples, and sealed medical data spanning generations. From Queen Victoria to Princess Diana, from Charles to William, from Harry to George. It exists not as a conspiracy, but as a safeguard. A cold, clinical response to the monarchy's greatest fear: an heir who isn't an heir. Because if the monarchy is anything, it's a bloodline, and the blood must be protected. So when word reached Princess and that a DNA war was breaking out, with Meghan spinning, Harry unraveling, and a mystery man filing legal papers in LA, she didn't call a press officer. She didn't call Charles. She called the keeper of the vault. Yes, that's a real position, held by a retired military physician who now works in royal security. The keeper oversees the physical maintenance and legal lockdown of all biological materials stored in the Crown Archive. He answers to no one but the reigning monarch, and, in crisis situations, to the Privy Council. And, sensing that this was a code-red scenario, invoked Emergency Protocol 19, a rarely used clause that allows for the reactivation and forensic verification of legacy heir samples. Translation? It was time to run the DNA. Now here's where things get intense. Because while the world obsessed over Archie's paternity and had already turned her attention to the second, and even more fragile, link in the Sussex chain, Lillibet Diana Mountbatten-Windsor. Lillibet, the child named after both the Queen and Diana, a name heavy with symbolism, weight, and royal expectation. But what if that name was built on a lie and needed answers? She authorized the extraction of Harry's archived blood sample, taken during his time at Sandhurst, verified, triple-locked, and sealed under biometric authentication. Then she sourced a known reference sample for Lillibet, acquired discreetly through a recent medical document Meghan had submitted for a preschool health clearance form in California. The palace had kept a digital trace of it. The two samples were sent to an independent forensic lab in Zurich, one with no direct ties to the Crown, the press, or the UK government. Neutral ground. And the results? Unambiguous. Lillibet Diana, the child presented to the world as the living symbol of reconciliation, did not share Prince Harry's DNA. Not partially, not weakly, not marginally. Zero biological relationship. It was worse than anyone in the firm had expected. Because at least with Archie, there was plausible deniability. A timeline. A murky overlap. But Lillibet? The discrepancy was total. And the implications were catastrophic. Let's break it down. If both children lack royal DNA, the Sussex claim to hereditary titles collapses. Any royal privileges, including security, funding, legacy inheritance, would be rescinded. More importantly, it would expose a deliberate deception, potentially orchestrated across years. And for Princess Anne, this wasn't just betrayal. It was breach of duty. A betrayal not only of Harry, but of the institution she's protected her entire life. So she called Charles, and when he was read the report, Charles reportedly went silent. For nearly 30 seconds. The longest pause his aides had ever recorded in a briefing. Then he said one word. Protocol. That one word activated a confidential operation known only to a handful of palace insiders. The Windsor contingency. It's not dramatic. It's not theatrical. It's just ruthless. The contingency includes immediate suspension of succession privileges for unverified heirs, activation of private legal counsel for preemptive custody motions, communication lockdown on all media channels tied to the royal name. Legal review of all public statements made by Harry and Meghan since 2019 to identify misrepresentation patterns. The goal? Contain the fallout. But containment wouldn't be easy. Not this time. Because while the palace was processing Lillibet's test in secret, Harry had already received his own results. And according to a Montecito insider, a household worker who resigned shortly after the confrontation, Harry's reaction made his meltdown over Archie look tame by comparison. He reportedly stared at the lab report for over an hour, then said softly, "I wasn't even in the country." He wasn't wrong. According to verified military service records, Harry had been attending a private security training retreat in Colorado for high-level ex-military personnel around the time of Lillibet's likely conception. Meghan had claimed it was a long-distance conception, that they'd reunited afterward. But now, Harry knew the math didn't work. The timelines didn't sync. The DNA didn't lie. And the worst part? He'd named her Lillibet, a name that symbolized trust between him and his grandmother, the late Queen Elizabeth. A name he'd chosen to honor the woman who meant more to him than the crown itself. Now that name had been weaponized. So what did he do? He didn't scream. He didn't cry. He did something far more telling. He walked into his private study, locked the door, and reportedly began typing. A letter. To whom? No one knew at first. But days later, it leaked that a handwritten note, delivered via royal diplomatic pouch, arrived at Windsor Castle, addressed personally to Princess Anne. The contents have never been made public, but according to sources close to the family, the note included two things: a full confession of what Harry now believed, and a request that Lillibet's name be removed from the line of succession. That's right. Harry voluntarily asked to have Lillibet's place revoked. It was the clearest admission yet, not only of betrayal, but of acceptance. But it wasn't just a moment of humility. It was a spark, because that letter would trigger something Meghan never anticipated. A cascade of action. And the release, not of scandal, but of truth. Because if Lillibet wasn't Harry's, then who was her father? The palace knew. So did Meghan. And what they were about to do with that knowledge would ignite a global storm. What does a man do when his entire world unravels in silence? When the fairy tale he built, the love he sacrificed everything for, is exposed as a carefully staged illusion. When both of his children are no longer his, he breaks. And that's exactly what happened in Montecito. No PR spin, no cameras, no Netflix crew in the background. Just Prince Harry, alone in his estate. And two DNA reports that shattered every truth he thought he owned. Let's start from the moment it hit. The final test results had been sitting in an envelope on his desk for 2 days. Unopened. He couldn't bring himself to look. Not after what he'd already seen in the report on Archie. That alone had sent shockwaves through his system. He'd stopped sleeping. Stopped eating. His security team reported he was pacing hallways at 3 a.m., talking to himself, whispering fragments of Diana's name, and muttering questions like, "What if it's all fake? Why didn't I see it? Was I just a vessel?" And then came the report on Lillibet. He opened it at 4:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. A California sun was setting behind him. The room was quiet, too quiet. No Meghan, no Archie, no Lillibet. They were gone. Not forever. Not yet. But Meghan had taken the children away for a mental health reset, her staff said. In reality, she'd vanished just before the truth was delivered, almost as if she knew what was coming. And when Harry opened that envelope, read the results confirming what William and even Netflix already suspected, the silence broke. He screamed, not in rage, not in grief, in confusion, raw, animalistic confusion. According to a staffer stationed near the perimeter gate, the sound was blood-curdling. Furniture was overturned. A decanter was shattered. Books torn off shelves. Security was called, not to restrain him, but to make sure he didn't hurt himself. One of his bodyguards, formerly assigned to royal duty in the UK, told a friend afterwards, "He wasn't the prince I knew. He was a ghost, a hollow man screaming into nothing." Then came the collapse. Harry fell to his knees, gripping the edge of the fireplace, clutching the DNA report like a grenade that had already gone off. His knuckles turned white. His breathing, erratic. He didn't cry. He held. And then, silence again. That was the scariest part, said one staffer. The way he suddenly shut down. Just got up. Walked away. Entered his private study. locked the door, and didn't come out for 18 hours. Inside that room, something changed. Because while the world has always seen Harry as reactive, impulsive, emotional, in those 18 hours, something colder took over. He didn't just sit and sulk. He strategized. He made calls, private ones, to old friends, former army contacts, two of his therapists, a childhood friend who'd remained loyal despite the Megxit exile, and, in the most shocking twist, a royal advisor he hadn't spoken to in years. He asked one thing from each of them. Was any of it real? And the answers weren't comforting, because as the calls unfolded, Harry started hearing stories, things he'd never known, red flags his friends had noticed and buried out of respect. Trips Meghan had taken that didn't add up, conflicting timelines, dismissive comments about his family when he wasn't around, jokes made behind his back at Hollywood events. And then, the final blow. A former aide from Meghan's team called him back, anonymously, and told him something that stopped him cold. She said you were the brand, not the blood. The brand, not the blood. That phrase echoed in his mind like a bullet ricocheting in a stone room. Because if he was the brand, the marketable face of royalty, and his blood didn't matter, then what was he to her? A name? A ticket? A uniform to wear and discard? The realization was too much. He opened the safe, removed a box labeled Diana. Inside, old letters, handwritten notes from his mother, a photo album, a clipping from a newspaper she'd circled, one that once speculated Charles wasn't Harry's father. Irony now? He whispered aloud, according to a housekeeper who overheard. They did it to her. And she warned me, and I didn't listen. But there was still one person he hadn't called. Meghan. Until now.